So, you ever wonder what a railroad worker from the 1800s, one with a literal hole in his head, has to do with, well, why teenagers do the things they do? It sounds crazy, I know, but today we're going to connect this absolutely bizarre medical case to the latest in brain science to figure it all out. I mean, it's a classic question, right? Why do teenagers seem almost hardwired to take risks? Is it just them being rebellious, or is there something more going on? Well, it turns out the answer isn't just, it's a phase. Nope, it's all about biology, and it all goes back to what's happening deep inside the brain. Scientists today have this really cool name for it, a developmental mismatch. Sounds kind of technical, but the idea is pretty straightforward. And to really get what it means, and, how we figured this out in the first place, we've got to jump in a time machine and go way, way back, like over 150 years back.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1848. We've got a railroad construction foreman, some dynamite, and an accident that is so unbelievably freakish, it's the kind of thing that would completely rewrite the book on how we understand the human brain, and really what makes us us.
And that foreman's name was Phineas Gage. During this explosion, this huge iron rod, a tamping rod, shot clean through his head. I mean, straight through his skull, right through the front part of his brain. The craziest part? He lived. He survived. But his survival kicked off one of the biggest medical mysteries of the century.
And we're not just talking survived. The guy was reportedly walking and talking just minutes later. Now you can imagine, this sent shockwaves through the medical world. They were all asking the same thing. Wait a minute, if a guy can lose a massive piece of his brain, his cortex, and just get up and walk away, what in the world does that part of the brain even do?
So Phineas Gage basically started a scientific brawl. You had two camps. In one corner, you had the whole brainers. They thought the brain was like this big, interconnected blob of jelly. If one part got hurt, another part would just take over. In the other corner were the localizers. They were like, no way. They believed the brain was more like a machine, with different parts. They even called them organs, for specific jobs like being kind or being smart.
But think about it. How could the localizers prove their point? This is the 1800s. No MRIs, no fancy brain scans. They couldn't see anything that was actually happening in there. So they had to come up with a way to prove it. And their solution was, well, let's just say it was very 19th century.
Yep. They used something called phrenology. It was this hugely popular idea at the time, and the whole concept was kind of wild. It claimed you could figure out everything about a person's personality just by, feeling the bumps on their skull. The logic went something like this. If you have a really strong personality trait, say you're super kind, then your brain's kindness organ must be really big. And that big organ would actually push on your skull from the inside, creating, you guessed it, a bump on the outside. Simple, right? Also completely wrong. Okay, so let's be clear. The whole bumps on the head thing was total pseudoscience. But here's the kicker. The localizers, even with their wacky methods, were actually onto something huge. That core idea that different bits of the brain have different jobs was absolutely spot on. And this is where we fast forward, because modern science is about to prove them right and finally give us an answer about teenagers.
So, let's jump to the late 2000s. Researchers come up with something called the dual systems model. And this model is what really explains that developmental mismatch we talked about earlier. The whole point is that teenage risk-taking isn't some kind of moral failing. It's actually a predictable outcome of two major systems in the brain growing at totally different rates.
Okay, so what are these two systems? It's really simple when you think about it like a car. First, you've got the limbic system. This is a part that handles emotions and rewards. It's the gas pedal. And in a teenager, that gas pedal is floored. It's fully developed and super sensitive. Then you have the prefrontal cortex. This is your impulse control, your decision-making. These are the brakes. And here's the catch. In a teenager, the brakes are still being built. Now, this gas pedal, no brakes idea makes a lot of sense, right? But for a while, that's all it was, a really good theory. Scientists needed to see it. They needed hard evidence, some way to actually measure this mismatch and prove for sure that these parts of the brain were on different timetables. And then, in 2014, they got it. A huge landmark MRI study came out. Researchers have been tracking people for years, watching their brains develop and measuring something called gray matter. That's the stuff with all the brain cells. And the results were, wow. They saw that the emotional, reward-seeking parts of the brain changed a little bit, but the prefrontal cortex, it went through a complete overhaul. It lost 17% of its volume. Now, I know what you're thinking. Losing brain matter sounds bad, right? But it's actually the opposite. It's like the brain is pruning away the connections it doesn't need, making the whole system faster and more efficient. It's a huge rewiring project, and this process, this fine-tuning, it goes on well into the early 20s. So those breaks, they're literally under construction for more than a decade.
Okay, so let's tie this all back together. Let's bring Phineas Gage back into the room. On one hand, you have the teenage brain. Gas pedal to the metal, brakes still being built. On the other hand, you have this poor guy from 1848 who had his brakes, his prefrontal cortex, literally yanked out of his head by an iron rod.
And what does it all mean for that old debate? Well, it turns out both sides were a little bit right. The localizers were right that specific areas of the brain do specific things. But the whole brainers were also right that it's all incredibly interconnected. The real answer, like it so often is, was somewhere in the middle.
But the real smoking gun, the final piece of this whole puzzle, came years later. Gage's own doctor finally revealed what happened to the man after the accident. He said, yeah, Phineas physically recovered, but his personality? It was gone. The responsible, well-liked guy he used to be was replaced by someone impulsive, foul-mouthed, and just completely unreliable.
And there it is. That's the connection. What that iron rod did to Phineas Gage was, in a way, give him an adult version of the teenage brain. It wiped out his impulse control, his ability to think about consequences, all the stuff the prefrontal cortex is supposed to do. The accident left him with a full-power engine and absolutely no brakes.
So this whole journey, from a literal hole in someone's head in the 1800s all the way to modern MRI scans, it does more than just solve an old mystery. It leaves us with a really big and kind of challenging question. If we know that the part of the brain responsible for good judgment is the very last thing to come online, how should that change the way we look at things? How should it change our schools, our laws, even how we think about justice for young people?